I've been flying my Habu XS and my Viper 70 a lot, but the problem is I'm flying them on these old 6S 4000 HRBs. They're rated 60C, but we all know C ratings aren't worth anything. I'm not getting the flight time that some of my friends are getting on their 70mm Vipers, so I decided I would grab a few new batteries. These ones are quite old. They're probably a good 3 or 4 years old. They've been through a lot of cycles of charging, use, and storage charging. I figured I'd try something new. These are 4000 milliamp 130 C6S from Zeee. It says they're Premium Pro. We'll see how they stack up against it. And the XS can actually take up to a 6000 milliamp battery. So I went and got these Ovonic Car 6120Cs. These are quite a bit larger than my 4000s. And I kind of want to see how these all stack up against one another. I've got a nice test bed set up here with everything I think that I'm gonna need for this. I've got my Hyperion charger hooked up to my power supply here, my DC power supply. I can supply up to 30 amps, so I can charge 2 LiPos here pretty quickly. I've got my HRBs over here. I've got one of those in the jet right now. The 4000 milliamp Zees, the 6000 milliamp Ovonics. A multimeter in case I need it, but I don't know how useful that's going to be for the testing. I can test with this tester to see what my current cell voltage is. I programmed a throttle curve into this to limit the max throttle that'll come out of this so I can be consistent between the different batteries in the jet. And then I've got the jet hooked up right here with a tie down strap. I'm not sure if I'm going to leave this on the stand or not. I think it's actually helping. This is what I usually use for my big nitro planes. This is plenty to keep this jet from flying off the table at me. Now initially I was just going to use the transmitter for the amperage testing to see what's coming out of it, and that does work. But I've also ordered an amp meter from Amazon, and that'll be coming in tomorrow. So I can solder on some EC5 connectors, put that directly in line with the LiPo, and I think we'll get better results from that. So I guess we gotta wait until that gets delivered tomorrow to actually start the testing, but yeah, I think we're set up. Keep watching so we can get these batteries compared as well as I can from here, I guess, without, a couple $1,000s worth of equipment. The Amazon servers are down or something, and my watt meter is not here yet. So we're gonna go ahead and proceed with what I can do for now. And what I want to do is I want to check the actual capacity of these batteries for milliamps. I'm going to discharge them down to about 3.7 volts. And then we're gonna put them on the charger here and charge them back up to see how many milliamps I actually get into it. I don't expect to get 6,000 in the 6,000 milliamp battery. I don't expect to get 4,000 into the 4,000 milliamp battery. But what I do expect is a number that I can use to compare between the different batteries. And I think that's gonna be a valuable way to compare these. It took a little longer for my watt meter to come in than I was expecting, but I got it all set up and ready to use. I've already taken some measurements to see how many milliamp hours these batteries could all hold. Now I'm just topping them all off before testing to make sure that they're all at 100%. That way all my numbers are as accurate as possible. I'm giving everything the best chance possible right off of the charger. I'm gonna top each one of these LiPos off, run it through the jet, and record all the peak values and everything that comes off the watt meter. I'm kind of making this up as I go along, but here is my watt meter. I went and put on bullet connectors. That way, if I want to change the load in the source at another time, I could just swap these two connectors. I've prepared EC5 connectors for this test because it's what this jet and these LiPos have. I'm just going to connect the LiPo to the source side, the plane to the load side, and we're going to go ahead and run this up. The values that I'm hoping to pull from this are going to be amp hours, watt hours, peak amps, minimum volts, and peak watts. I'm planning to run it for 3.5 minutes on each LiPo. Then I'm going to take the cell voltages and the IR that the charger is going to give me once I put it back on to charge. And we're going to record all that and see if that gives us any information. I'm going to detail the process on this first battery. Here I've got my watt meter. I'm going to connect the plane to the load side. I'm going to connect my LiPo to the source side. I'm going to connect my LiPo checker to the balance port. Now I've got all the information I could possibly want, including per cell voltages. Now I'll just run it up for 3.5 minutes and then find out what all my readings are all at once. That's an immediate issue. The first LiPo, as soon as I got it going, it was less than 30 seconds on full 100%, and it started pulsing. And that might be a sign of what I'm gonna see with these older HRB batteries. I've got my transmitter set up for 3.5 minutes at 50% throttle curve. So the max this is gonna get up to is 50% throttle. I'm gonna keep it there for a time. I think I'm gonna start with 3.5 minutes and see if the batteries can all make it there. When they're finished with that, I'm going to record the cell voltages, and I'm gonna put the batteries on the chargers and get the internal resistance as well. It'll be interesting to see if any of them change significantly. Now that I got it all set up for the first battery, I'm gonna throttle up to full on my transmitter, which is set to 50% on my throttle curve, and start a 3.5 minute timer. That's 3.5 minutes at 50% throttle. I've got a lot of information here. I'm gonna write it down for this test. I'm gonna continue this. I'm gonna go through the rest of the LiPos with this test, charge them back to 100%, put them back in, but this time I'm gonna set the transmitter for 100% throttle curve, power it up, give it just a few seconds, and then power it down. That way we can get the max that they can run at 100%. That's the last LiPo, and that's the last data on sticky notes. That means I have all of the information I can gather from these that I can think of. If you have ideas of other ways I can measure things on this, other metrics that we can use, let me know in the comments. I can redo this pretty easily. Now it's time to collect all my sticky notes, organize them, take them into the house, and get them ready to put into my spreadsheet tomorrow morning. Hopefully I get some cool data out of this. I think I can already see some pretty cool trends that show me that the HRBs that I've been using for the last few years are just beyond their expiration date. So we'll see what that data shows us. I apologize for the light. This is just my den. The light's not great here, but this is where I work every day. I wasn't sure how I was gonna film this. I haven't done screen recording before, and I could probably figure out how to do it today. I'm gonna look through my spreadsheets and talk about the charts that I was able to create. Then I'll put the charts in the actual video so you can see what I'm talking about. By the way, I accidentally typed H and B into this spreadsheet instead of HRB. Ignore that. Anywhere where it says H and B is HRB. The first graph I want to talk about is pretty simple. It's just how many milliamps I was able to get into the batteries from the storage voltage, which was 3.7 volts, up to 4.2 volts per cell. Regardless of the LiPo that I was charging, it doesn't look like there was a lot of difference. You can see on the left graph here that all the H and B 1 through 4 are pretty similar, and the Z 1 and 2 are pretty similar as well. HRB 1 and 3 held a little less than HRB 2 and 4, but for the most part, there wasn't a big difference here. The right graph is the same data, I just limited the y-axis from 2000 up to 6000, so it makes it more obvious, but there's really not much of a difference. What you could clearly see here is comparison. The 4000 milliamp LiPos all took about the same amount of milliamp hours, but the 6 amps were able to take a little more. In fact, the winner here is the HRB 6000 milliamp. It was able to take just a little bit more than the 6000 milliamp Ovonics. So there's really nothing here that's too surprising. I'm glad to see that the milliamp hour capacity hasn't changed over time, except for HRB 1 and 3 being a little lower than HRB 24, Z1 and 2. Next, I've plotted 6 graphs next to each other. The top 3 represent values I got at storage charge when they were all at 3.7 volts per cell. The bottom 3 represent values that I got at full charge once I had charged them all up to 4.2 volts per cell. The 2 left charts represent the minimum volts, the maximum volts, and the average between them. The blue is the minimum cell voltage that LiPo has, the red is the highest cell voltage that LiPo has, and the yellow is the average of all 6 cell voltages. I really didn't see anything interesting here. It's the next chart that was surprising to me and eventually explains something later on. The middle chart shows the minimum, maximum, and average for the internal resistance in each LiPo. Between these 2 charts, the top one is far more interesting. You can actually see the HRB 1, 2, 3, and 4 are kind of grouped together. Z1 and 2 are fairly close, and Ovonic 1, 2, and the HRB 6000, they're all really close as well. And if you look at the top right chart, which is the standard deviation for the internal resistance at storage voltage, you could see the HRB 3 and 4 have a much higher deviation than any other cell, followed up by the Ovonic 2. And again, that's going to come into play later on to explain something. This is a little easier to read. It shows a line representing the minimum and maximum, and then a dot that shows the average for that cell. Here it's super easy to see that the HRBs are all clustered in one area. Ovonic 1, 2, and HRB 6000, the 6000 milliamp HRB LiPo, they're all clustered in another area. And then the Z1 and 2 LiPos are also clustered in their own separate area. You can also see by the size of the whiskers that there might be some issues with a couple of these batteries, and honestly, I'm not too surprised with HRB 3 and 4. I am surprised with Ovonic 2. I've been using HRB 1 through 4 for about 4 years now. I will charge them when I'm ready to use them, and then usually go out the next morning to fly. I'll start with number 4, then I'll go to number 3, and then 2 and 1. Sometimes I only fly twice, so that might explain why HRB 1 and 2 seem like they have way better values right now than HRB 3 and 4. Okay, we're gonna move on to the first actual testing. This is 50% throttle testing for 3.5 minutes. The first graph I'm looking at here is amp hours. You can see HRB 1 through 4 are lower than everyone else. And I thought that was a good thing at first, but later I realized what that actually means. It means those 4 batteries were not able to provide as many amps as the other batteries, which is a negative thing. The next graph is watt hours, and you see the same trend. HRB 1, 2, 3, and 4 definitely are able to provide less watt hours than the other 5 LiPos. However, HRB 3 and 4 are the worst out of the bunch. You can see in peak amps, Ovonic 1 is able to provide way more than Ovonic 2 and HRB 1 through 4. And I can't help but think that that's related to the high IR values on Ovonic 2, HRB 1, 2, 3, and 4. The peak watts graph also shows this trend that HRB 3 and 4 are able to provide less peak watts than everything else, followed by HRB 1, 2, and Ovonic 2. Everything else is able to provide more watts, which is good. As far as minimum voltages, you could see HRB 1 through 4 definitely sagged lower than everything else, and that's indicative of an older battery that is not able to provide as much. Ovonic 1 and 2 here were able to keep up just fine. Z1 and 2 are pretty much identical to one another. HRB 6000 is just a little above that and below the Ovonic 1 and 2. This chart reinforces the idea that HRB 1 through 4 are kind of past their prime. Now we're going to look at the 100% throttle charts. I just wanted to look at the standard deviation chart again here, and again, you can kind of cross-reference these things. Everything is kind of flipped. Where the standard deviation is higher, which is a bad thing, you could see that the LiPos were able to provide less peak watts, less peak amps, and less watt hours and less amp hours. and tend to sag to a lower minimum voltage. Now let's look at the 100% test. In this test, every LiPo was charged back up to 100%. Then I put it back into the jet and ran it for 5 to 10 seconds, and we're seeing the results of that. Because the time was so short, we could pretty much ignore the top left and top middle charts. We're not really worried about time. We're really just looking at peak values on this one. For example, in amp peak and watt peak, you could see HRB 3 and 4 both performed worse than every other LiPo in those sections. I believe that's because the IR is so high on those two LiPos that they're not able to provide as many amps and watts as the other LiPos. HRB 3 and 4 were also the only two LiPos that were giving me issues during the 100% test. Before the 5 to 10 seconds were over, the jet was already pulsing, showing that it was not getting what it needed to from that battery. The amp and watt charts here show that the HRB 1 and 2 are still valid, usable LiPos for the most part, but the best LiPos currently for watt and peak output is going to be the Zeee 1 and 2. If you have any other interpretations of this data, drop it below. I would really like to see everybody's opinions about this. I'm probably doing some stuff wrong. I'd like to learn how to do it right, so let me know. If you're still with me, thanks for sticking with me. I'm hoping that this information is valuable. I don't necessarily think the values I got are going to be valuable to anybody else, but I'm trying to develop a method that I can test my LiPos with, and maybe that'll be helpful to somebody that wants to compare their LiPos. If you want to see more content like this, let me know down below. Give me a share, a like, a subscribe would be awesome. If you have any suggestions on anything else you'd like to see, including different ways to test LiPos, drop that below, leave me a note, tell me what I should do differently. It's been a long one. Thanks for sticking around this far. I'll see you in the next one.